Here are some snippets of Trump's State of the Union where he touches on the issue of immigration.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They've allowed millions of low-wage workers to compete for jobs and wages against the poorest Americans. Most tragically, they have caused the loss of many innocent lives. Tonight, I am calling on Congress to finally close the deadly loopholes that have allowed MS13 and other criminal gangs to break into our country. We have proposed new legislation that will fix our immigration laws and support our ICE and Border Patrol agents. These are great people. These are great, great people that work so hard in the midst of such danger.
So one of the tricks that Trump used throughout his speech and the portions on immigration, he would keep weaving back and forth between talking about immigrants and talking about MS-13. So what he's doing there is an old rhetorical trick where you try to conflate the things in people's minds. Obviously, his base who already agrees with him is going, yeah, that's what it is. Immigrants are basically MS-13. They're basically bad people who broke the law, and they shouldn't be here, and they're bad people, and they need to go. So that's a little bit of preaching to the choir and throwing the red meat at the base, but that's also an attempt to garner support from moderates and independents and say, look, I'm just telling it like it is, man, and when I go from casually talking about MS-13 to talking about immigrants, sure, I'm conflating those things in your mind, but that's the point. I should be conflating them in your mind because these immigrants are criminals anyway, aren't they? So that's what that is. That's what that trick is. Now, when you dive into the specifics of what he's talking about here, you see how he's just wrong. So, for example, he's talking about open borders. What open borders? What the fuck are you talking about? We don't have open borders. That's not true. In fact, Barack Obama, much to the dismay of the left-wing base, he was called the deporter-in-chief. He deported over 2 million people. He broke the record for deportation. So you can't say, like, the weak borders under the Democrats. They're not even deporting people. When Obama broke the fucking record. Because you're just wrong when you act like open borders. Open borders. And then there's that other fact that nobody brings up. It's from a few years ago, admittedly. I think it was like 2010 or something like that. Where net immigration was 0. So there were the same number of undocumented immigrants leaving the country as coming in the country. Listen, this is the oldest trick of elites. They try to get working class white people to blame poor people of color for their problems. And as they do that, the elites run out the back door with all the money. You know, they go, it's the person with no money and no power who is really hurting you, Mr. Middle-class white person, and then they run out the back door with all the money. That's the trick. No, the problem is the elites. The problem is the corporations, and they're rigging the system in favor of themselves, in favor of big pharma and the for-profit insurance companies and Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. They rig the rules in their favor, and then they convince white working-class people, no, don't look, the problem's not rich people. In fact, rich people are more virtuous because they just worked harder because this is a meritocracy, even though this is not a meritocracy. Blame poor people of color for all your problems. And it works, unfortunately. That's why it's the oldest trick in the book, because it fucking works. And that's what Trump is doing here. Oh, let's talk about this non-issue, which we're going to pretend is a giant problem. Now, by the way, he also goes on to talk about the loss of innocent life. Again, it's an attempt to conflate immigration with crime. Immigration, crime, immigration, crime. Now, this is where people who aren't very educated on the issue go, yeah, well, aren't immigrants criminals? Like, isn't that obvious that statistically they commit more crimes? Well, actually, no, it's the exact opposite. Immigrants commit less crime than natural-born U.S. citizens. It's not just legal immigrants either. It is also undocumented immigrants who commit fewer crimes than natural-born U.S. citizens. Now, I don't care if that fact triggers you. I don't give a shit. It's true. So there are going to be some people like, no, but that's not what it feels like. Well, you've been reading too much of Ann Coulter's Twitter feed, where she takes any crime from any immigrant anywhere and tweets about it nonstop and acts like, see? And again, the implication there is use this instance to crack down on all immigrants. Well, that's just stupid because it's not true. Because, like I just showed you, statistically, immigrants are less likely to commit crimes. They commit fewer crimes than natural-born U.S. citizens. And then the final point is, he kept doing this too, where he referenced drugs and gangs, and you try to conflate that with immigrants. But here's the thing, Don. If you really cared about those issues, okay, we have the solution. Legalize, tax, and regulate drugs. Now, again, see, that one's counterintuitive, so you really lose, people who don't follow this stuff and aren't open-minded. But if you look at the evidence, the conclusion I just pointed to becomes clear. So, for example, during Prohibition, alcohol was illegal. When alcohol was illegal, that's the period in U.S. history where the mafia became massively powerful, and there was a giant spike in crime. Why? Because alcohol is illegal, there's a black market, and when there's a black market, they police themselves on the black market, so you settle disputes with Tommy guns. Now, the parallel to today is drugs are illegal because of the drug war. Black market is created to sell the drugs. When you have a problem, you solve it with guns in the street. If you legalize, tax, and regulate drugs, what happens? Instead of solving the problem with guns in the street, you solve it wearing suits and ties and going to court. So if you legalize it, tax it, and regulate it, you take it from the black market where it's underground, where there's no regulation, and you shine light on it, and you bring it into society. And now, otherwise shady mob bosses, gangsters, those guys are out of the picture because they're put out of business by the legitimate businesses. And now you have a regular Joe Schmo CEO who runs a company that sells weed. So this isn't that hard to figure out. I admit it's counterintuitive. What, you're going to legalize drugs to stop drug problems and gang problems? Yes! Yes, look at the evidence. That's what'll happen. So if he really cared about that, that's what he'd do. But he doesn't care about it, or he doesn't know. So he's either helplessly ignorant or stupid, or he knows about it, but it's like, I don't care because I'm an ideologue and I want to just blame immigrants and crack down on immigration while also continuing the drug war, which was the equivalent of flushing $1 trillion down the toilet while increasing crime and increasing the number of drugs used. So it doesn't work, but they're going to double down on wrong. That's what's going to happen. Wrong, as somebody once said.